Good morning, everyone. This is Kathy Mason from Mason Works Marketing here on Conscious Business Zone with my friend Lee Witting. Hi, Lee. How are you?
Hi, Kathy. I'm fine. How are things out there
Oh, great, great. I'm in Colorado, and you are?
in Penobscot, Maine, right on the Penobscot Bay?
Wow, wow. Well,
If I
we have,
look if I look away from the screen and across the bay, I can see a lighthouse right from here.
oh, how beautiful. Well, you are a lighthouse. How perfect that you said that. You are, you are. I'm so glad to have you on and have people learn a little bit about what you're offering and what your life's. I mean, you've dedicated 7 years of your life to Nde Radio as part of IONS, which is the International Association in Near-Death Experiences and or Studies, excuse me. And what I wanted to start with, if you would be so kind, I know you have a very interesting life story. I'm so excited to get to hear more about it. But you started out with your interest in NDEs because you had one at a young age. Will you share a little bit about that?
Sure, sure. My father came back from the war, and he was had had some interesting and very difficult experiences in World War II. And as part of his therapy, he built a little cabin on a little island on a little lake in Branchville, New Jersey.
Okay.
And that's where we went as a family in the summer, whenever he could get away, which was not that often, unfortunately. Well, my NDE occurred when he he was away. He was, and my mother had gone into this little cottage that we had that my dad had built. And I was 7 years old and I didn't know how to swim, which is really dumb. But I waded out too far into the lake, and the lake went out fairly levelly, and then all of a sudden it dropped way down, and I went down with it. And I came up once and screamed from my mother. I was terrified. And of course, when I screamed, all the air went out of my lungs,
Oh
and
no.
I sank down, down, down to the bottom. Fortunately, my mother heard my scream, and she came running out of the cottage. And the reason I know she did was because I was out of my body. All of a sudden, my soul, that's the way I look at it. Other people have other names for it, consciousness or whatever. But my soul was sitting up in a birch tree next to the house. And I watched my mother tear down to the shore, shallow dive into the water. And she found me, pulled
Yeah.
me out of the lake, carried me up to the land, and threw me down face down over a log, pumped on my back to get the water out of my lungs. And in the process, she sort of invented an upside down CPR because the compressions the log was making on my chest while she was pumping on my back got my heart going again.
Wow.
But meantime, I'm up here watching this whole thing happening. There were no other beings with me. I didn't see any angels or anything like that. I did see a light. I saw that there was a place that I could go, and in fact, I may have gone, but I don't remember. Time stands still when you're over there, so something that just takes a few minutes to happen, on Earth, can be forever in a timeless place like the other side. So I saw how upset she was, and I saw that there was a place that I could go and stay. And I just decided that I'd better take care of my mom because she was so worried, and I knew she would be devastated if I if I died right then and there. So then I was back in my body. Now, when you're on the other side, you feel so good. There's no pain. Even when we're feeling healthy in our bodies are compensating for the pains, the aches and pains that we normally have. When you're on the other side, it's amazing how pain-free, how wonderful it feels just by virtue of the fact that you don't have this, you're not carrying around this Hulk with you. So, but going back into your body is doubly hard because, when you had your lungs full of water or whatever, it hurts. It hurts. Anyway, for years after that, I had this recurring dream. And the dream was that I was sinking down. The way I understood the dream was that I was sinking down from the surface of the lake. And I could see the light up here at the surface of the lake, and it was dark, and it was getting darker and darker and darker. And finally, and it wasn't until I was in my 20s, I went back to the cottage one day, dove into the lake, went down to the bottom holding my breath, and looked up to see if it looked like my dream. It didn't look anything like my dream. The light on the surface of the sunlight on the surface of the lake was spread evenly over the whole lake. The darkness that I had envisioned was not dark at all. I mean, the light went down the 10 feet or so that I was underwater, and so I didn't understand that it was this other thing until years later when I started reading about the tunnel and the light. And then I thought, well, maybe I had traveled into the light. And then this was my dream, was my journey back, coming back from the light, coming back to my body. So that's how I finally explained it.
Wow.
And I never told anyone about it. And I'll tell you, I'm glad, having talked to hundreds of people who've had near-death experiences and hearing their stories about how they either told people or didn't tell people about their experience. I think it was very wise of me not to tell anyone, because you either scare them to death, which would have done my mother, or you get belittled. People who come, when I was doing my chaplain work, people would come to me all the time, or I would be in their room and they would say, I told the doctor about this NDE that I had, and he just told me I was crazy, or he told me it was the anesthesia, or he told me it was a hallucination. These kinds of put downs make people either, in fact, some doctors have recommended psychotherapy for patients who tell about an NDE.
Right.
It's very, very horrifying results come unless you find someone who is sympathetic. Well, as a chaplain, 15 years at Eastern Maine Medical Center in Bangor, Maine, I would visit people who had coded. And the first thing I would say was, well, did you see anything when you were on the other side? Because I wanted them to talk to someone who was sympathetic, who understood, who could verify, that this was not a craziness on their part.
Right.
So anyway, that's how I finally resolved to myself that, yeah, it took me 30 years to tell anyone this story, but it was a good thing.
Wow. Wow. Well, I want to welcome Terry and Elsie, and hopefully, Terry and Elsie, if you have questions for Lee, Lee not only has had an NDE at age 7, but he has interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people over 7 years on the NDE radio show for IONS. So he's a plethora of information, and it'd be fascinating to hear his answer to your questions if you have them. So please feel free to shoot away. But Lee, so when did you come up with the idea to do the radio show? Because IONS is a nonprofit, and they've got so many different facets, and it seems like a lot of the projects I've seen, people came in and, oh, Terry said that you interviewed her about her NDE.
Mm-hmm.
How about that? Yeah, small world, huh?
Well, my whole family has had a long interest in radio and television. My father was instrumental in starting one of the first TV networks in the country, Dumont Television Network. It was WABD Channel 5 in New York City. And although they were up against NBC and CBS, which had far more money and finally just killed Dumont,
Yeah.
he was interested in broadcasting, and he had contacts with lots of people from his work in camp shows during the war. So he was able to put people like Jackie Gleason and Lucille Ball and other people on television, get them started, even though they wound up in other on larger networks after a while. But
Mhm.
so when I got into college at Columbia University, I was at WKCR, which is their radio station. And later on, and when I was in Maine, I had um, a radio show on the local channel on the community radio station. It was called Earth Tones.
Oh, cool.
It was Native American music and Eastern music, from India primarily, and and it was meditative music, and then I would interrupt it with maybe an NDE story from Ions. So, uh, so I've always so that it came very naturally to me to the next time I was at a board meeting at Ions to say, we really ought to start a radio station, and Talk Zone, the company that produces the show, is my brother's company, Chris Witting. He followed in my father's footsteps too, and he's been in radio ever since. So that's the reason that it came as a natural suggestion for me to make.
Oh, fantastic. Well, you and I were lucky enough to do a Friday night after party thing. Where
Yeah,
it was after Anita Morjani on the Ions did a virtual conference that was fantastic. And Anita Morjani was one of the keynote speakers. And Leah and I were asked to do a gig after.
a virtual after the conference party.
Yeah, it was really fun. And so what I did is I interviewed Lee before we did our gig, and I got 6 questions that I asked you during that, and then we had the audience chime in. And so
Right.
I thought if people don't have a lot of questions here, that we could revisit some of that, because I think what's fascinating is how you are able to put everything together without I don't want to say doctrine, but I mean you are able to still do ministry and look at reincarnation, look at all these other aspects that aren't necessarily in one religion.
Right.
So how did you, first of all, before we go to questions, how did you formulate all of that? I mean, that had to be, you had to be treading on the rims of what was acceptable.
Well, I'll take you way back to after my NDE when I was 7. Um, I'd been a normal kind of kid. I was, I watched Howdy Doody on television, and Hopalong Cassidy was a favorite of mine. After this NDE, all my interests changed. I got interested in astronomy of all things. I wanted to go look at the stars at night. And my mother took me to the Hayden Planetarium in New York. I was dazzled by it. I was overwhelmed by the fact that they had created this domed structure and they could make meteors and comets flash by, and the sun could rise and set, and the moon could go through its phases. And I got so interested in it that I took over a room in our attic at the house and built my own planetarium. I went and got cardboard boxes from all the people that sold appliances. I got these big sheets of cardboard from like refrigerator cartons, and made a skyline and set up lights behind it so I could have a sunrise and a sunset on a dimmer.
Wow.
I had a little projector from it was a toy, but it was a wonderful toy from the Hayden Planetarium, and I would project the stars on the ceiling, and I would write scripts. I would have a story. I'd get my mother to come up and lie down on the mattress on the floor, and I would go through this whole routine with her. And finally, she realized I was really interested in this stuff, so she bought me a 3.5-inch reflecting telescope so I could go out at night and look at the moon and look at Mars and so forth. And it was just it was such a different point of view. All of a sudden, I wanted to see the big picture, and so I think that's carried along with me. I mean, I was being raised Catholic, and all of a sudden, all of the trappings of Catholicism were kind of yeah, you know, I'd go to Sunday school and I wouldn't have memorized my catechism, so the nun would whack me on the wrist with her ruler
Ruler.
to make me study harder. The only question I remember from that whole period was the first one, which I think was the first question in our kids' catechism was, "Why did God make me?" And the answer was, "God made me to show His goodness and to make me happy with Him in heaven." That stayed with me my whole life, and everything else, all the trappings, the rules, the regulations, the dogma, have kind of slipped by. You know, they're just not that important to me. And then I got to Columbia, and I studied. My dad insisted. He said, "If I'm going to pay for this tuition, you're going to study economics," because he wanted me to go into business. So I majored in economics, but I had a second, almost as many credits in Eastern studies, Buddhism, Tao, all of the Eastern religions, and it was mind blowing. And of course, reincarnation is a big part of that. And
Exactly.
so I've always carried that really broad view of what religion is all about ever since, um, in large part because of the NDE, and also the you come away. 60% of the people who've had NDEs, even if they're strict Christians, suddenly they think, I think there is something to reincarnation. They really buy into it because you sense that we are not stuck in one lifetime. You're not trapped by the life you're living right now.
Right.
You've got all these possibilities are open to you, and it's not just this lifetime. It could be the next lifetime. It could have been a past lifetime that you're still learning from. This very much broadens your outlook too, and that's why when I finally went to seminary, I decided to be a chaplain instead of, I was taught to be a congregational pastor, but I went into the hospital knowing that I was going to meet tons of people from different faiths and tons of people from no faith at all, and I needed a general point of view that accepted everything, basically. I mean everything. UFOs, you name it. I've had long conversations with people about all of you go into someone's room in the hospital, more and more, they'll say, "Well, I'm not religious." You say, you come in, you introduce yourself, you're the chaplain. They'll say, "Oh, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual." And then they'll have a question, and that'll lead to a conversation, and you can be there for 2 hours,
Well,
just talking to them about what they want to hear
that's
or
what
what they want to say, really, because you wind up listening more than you do talking. But when you talk, you don't put them down for anything.
but you're holding space and you're helping them
I
process.
can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Can other people hear me? You can't hear me?
Should I keep talking?
That's very strange.
No,
I've never had that happen. Let's see. You can't hear me.
don't hear a word. No,
Hmm. Weird.
my volume is up.
Okay, so let me.
All right, so I get the whole screen now. Yikes. Well, let me tell you how I was affected. Oh, now you're on the other side of the screen.
Can you hear me now?
I still can't hear you.
They can hear me.
I'll tell you from the astronomy thing how the NDE affected my life,
Okay.
because it gave me a lot of confidence in doing things that I otherwise probably would not have done. I was raised in a middle class neighborhood, in a suburban neighborhood. I went to a very sort of sheltered school, and I managed to get into Columbia University, which was pretty good for me because I wasn't a great student, but I had an aptitude for SATs, and that counted for a lot in those days. So my dad, having lived in New York, we were living in outside of Pittsburgh at the time, gave me $50 and a bus ticket and said, "All right, you're going to be in New York. It's going to be really distracting. Go to New York City, find a job, find a place to live until the fall when you start in school." So I had a few little jobs. I'd been a copy boy for the Pittsburgh Press for one summer, but basically not any experience. I went to New York on the bus. I went to an employment agency. I got a job pushing racks around in the garment district. And because I was down in the 23rd Street area, I found a room at what turned out to be an amazing place called the Chelsea Hotel. The Chelsea Hotel was where it was so cheap, it was so grubby, that that's where all the artists who were becoming successful hung out. And I met some amazing people, but mainly I met, there was this black poet who he and I became friends, and he would read his poetry to me. So I got interested. I got interested in poetry. I actually have published a book of bad poetry called Dr. Doggerel Howls at the Moon. But that was something that I probably wouldn't have had the nerve to do if I hadn't had my NDE. You know, you come back from an experience like that and you think, gosh, I was dead and it didn't hurt a bit. So what's to be afraid of? And
Right.
that's one of the things that people bring back as a experience, is that there's nothing to fear when you think about death, and that's probably at the root of everyone's fear in the
Right.
long run. You know, you'd be afraid of losing your money or afraid of losing a friend, but ultimately it comes down to, yikes, I'm going to die. What does that mean? Well, when you know what it means and you're not worried about it anymore, it enables you to do lots and lots of courageous things. For instance, outside after Columbia, I got a job for the New York Department of Welfare in Harlem. I was probably the only white face for 20 blocks,
Wow.
visiting my clients that were mainly older people who were in need of medical help, didn't have any money, and this was before Medicare and Medicaid came in. So they would send a caseworker to evaluate the situation, and New York wanted to know if these people had any assets. Well, they didn't have any assets, you know. And we would tell them if they had any assets, not to talk about it, because it would all disappear and in a
Yeah.
flash of lightning, and then they'd be really, you know, even poorer than they were poor already. So I would be walking into brownstones, rundown brownstones with no lights down the hallway. You'd be going along maybe with a little flashlight, trying to find the room, the apartment that you're
Wow.
was supposed to knock on the door, and the numbers might be missing off of the doors, and you'd have to find out and talk to other people. And usually the hallways were black because nobody could afford light bulbs, and they'd steal the light bulbs out of the fixtures in the hallway. You know, that would have been frightening to me at one time, but it wasn't. It wasn't. And then later, after I'd worked for a while and I was married, and my wife and I had a little 3-year-old, we decided to just drop everything, and we bought a Volkswagen camper through Europe by car or whatever it was. Went
Yeah.
over, got on a coal freighter in Norfolk, went to Germany, and spent almost a year just driving around Europe, living on $5 a day, which was, you know, that was a total of our savings. We didn't make it quite a year because we didn't have $5 a day saved up for a full year. But we went all through Europe, went down through the coast of Yugoslavia,
Mm.
into Turkey, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, uh, Israel. This was 1966. This was just before the 67 war, and met amazing people. It was still a peaceful area. You know, it's a disaster now, but saw amazing things. We followed Crusader routes. We followed sacred routes, because I was fascinated with sacred sites, both religious, Christian, I should say, and pagan, and and Jewish too, of course. I mean, we were in the Dome of the Rock and places like that. So again, it was just a matter of, you know, anyone could have done it, but most people said, I would never do that. That's a scary undertaking that you've got going there.
I
It was the strength of that conviction from the NDE.
Is there a chance that
So
him?
now, if you're talking about business
Okay,
and spirituality,
right.
I had to. Um, yes, phone. Okay, hold on. Oh, I got it. I got it.
Okay, so now you know what to do?
Yes,
Okay,
I do.
I'll hang up the other phone.
Well,
You
okay.
ready? Is she there?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
So we're just multi-layer because everyone can hear me, but no one can. But you can't hear me.
I can't hear you for some reason. No.
No, but these are great. You're doing great anyway.
All right.
But
Should.
so I just wanted you to hear, if I could, I wanted to let you know that some people are asking questions. Can I?
Sure.
Okay. So right now, Elsie said, "In what way do you believe that you're fearless? How does that feel?"
Well, I wouldn't. I'm not. Shall I answer on the phone or just on the?
Just on here.
Okay. Hold on just a second. Let me mute this because I think otherwise you're going to have an echo. There. I, I I I think it would be foolish to say that I'm fearless. I mean, when I've done things that I found uh, well, for example, I was when I was going to seminary, I used to drive past this huge old church. It had been on the market in Bangor, Maine for years. The sign was the for sale sign from the broker was so tattered and so worn out. One day, I just got this impulse that I should go look at this church. So I called the broker, and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad you called." She said, "They're just about to turn. There's this proposal to turn this into Section 8 housing. They would put layers of apartments and take out the stained glass windows and really destroy what was a beautiful building." So I said, "Oh, let me come see it." No, I didn't. I didn't have a lot of money. I had some money from I had a little real estate office on the coast, and I'd given that up to go to seminary, but I still had that building, and so I went into this church. Now this church was built in 1851, and it was absolutely breathtaking. It was very dilapidated. You could see the roof had been leaking, but it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. And I said, "I'm going to buy it." She said, "Well, these people have got a lot of money, and they're talking to the city about getting the permits to do all this work." I said, "Well, at least I'll go to the meetings and see what happens." So I went to the meetings, and they were saying this was going to be great, and the people who were selling the church, the Unitarians, were going to get a lot of money, $250,000 or something like that, and they were pleading with the city historic commission. The historic commission was saying, "Well, you can't take these beautiful stained glass windows out, but you can't have apartments with stained glass windows." They were so they were going back and forth, and the church was saying, "Well, we'll never sell it to anybody. Nobody's ever going to buy it if you have these restrictions on it." And I'd be in the back of the room, and I'd raise my hand, and I'd say, "I'll buy it." Now, I had no idea how I was going to pay for this thing, but I knew I had a little building down in Castine, Maine, which was worth something. So um, the uh, finally, this was after like the third or fourth meeting. The historic commission said, "Well, what about that guy in the back who keeps saying he'll buy it?" Well, I had half, actually less than half of what these people were offering for it. And they didn't want to hear that I would buy it. But for the historic commission, it didn't matter what they were going to get for it. What mattered was preserving the property. Right. And so they turned down this group of business people, and they said, "Let him buy it." And wow. So I did. And I started a church, non-denominational church. I was just fresh out of seminary. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I said, "I'm going to do a church that's totally different." And what it amounted to was like a group therapy session every Sunday. I didn't do sermons. we would just gather around and we'd sing some hymns and we'd say some prayers and we'd talk. We talk about what was on our mind. We talk about people getting into fights, people getting raped on occasion. I mean, all sorts of amazing, very personal, very healing stories once they got told. And of course, I'd bring in near-death experience stories that I'd heard. At this point, in order to support myself, I'd gotten the chaplain's job, and I was bringing these stories back and telling people to reassure them. So it wasn't fearless on my part to do it. I mean, it was kind of a calculated risk for sure, but it was something that otherwise, I think if I hadn't had this background in taking chances, I wouldn't have done it. Now, business people take chances too, without benefit of a near-death experience.
Right.
People take risks, but and they're calculated risks. Hopefully, I mean, they're not totally foolish, but you need to, I think, in anything, you need to understand, first of all, that this is not the be all and end all of things. That the life you're living right now is only a tiny part of the big picture. And that's where the importance of spirituality comes in, because if you have that background, whether it's going to church or synagogue or mosque, or if it's just, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, like most people are saying these days, if you have a sense that you and God are in communication, that this is a possibility, even if you don't hear God speaking directly in your ear, it is so it's so important to the balance of your life, to how to value your family just as much or even more than your business, because when you value your family, you're strengthening your personal psychological situation in a way that will make your business more likely to succeed.
Right. Well, it's
all of these relationships they shouldn't be kept apart. They should be really united together. Now, some people have actually built their businesses through their spiritual community. They may have a big congregation that they join, and they become the guy to go to if you need your roof fixed, or you want to buy insurance, or sell your house, or all those things can work through a church community too. In fact, the early Christians had something like that going for them. That was, from each, according to his wealth, to whoever needed something. It was early Christianity was very communist and very good from my point of view on that account. But there was also, it was a community, and the community supported one another. So businesses probably thrived back then as well. I've been in the catacombs. I've seen some evidence of that.
When I was in college, I read a book. When I was in college, I read a book that was from the Yogi Press, and it was called Reincarnation and the Law of Karma. And it was a history of early Christianity when reincarnation was still in it. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but when we're talking about NDEs and we're talking about life after life, and now you've talked about spirituality that goes with it. Could you share why you think that organized religion seems to be opposed to NDEs?
Sure.
Okay.
The problem, I think, the reason that the Catholic Church finally said there was no truth to reincarnation was because it threatened their authority. They realized that if all their parishioners thought they didn't have the power of heaven or hell over them, which is what the Catholic Church claims, if you don't go to the priest and confess your sins, you're going to hell. If you don't contribute, if you don't go to Mass and contribute, then you'll go to hell. I guess they don't make tithing a law the way some Protestant sects do. But in any event, that was the reason, and I think it's still the reason, because if a pastor has a congregation full of people who talk to Jesus personally in a near-death experience, they're sort of out of the picture. They're totally outclassed. Even though, now I'll tell you, there's a very successful church in Sedona, and one Sunday, this guy, he hadn't had a near-death experience himself, the pastor, but he had a friend who had, and the friend told him this story about what he'd seen, and the pastor got so excited about it. Okay, he was the unusual pastor that is turned on by the notion of personal mystical experience, that he brought this as a sermon to his congregation on Easter Sunday. Well, the place went wild because there were people there who had near-death experiences and never told anyone, and they're getting up and saying, I had an experience like that. I'd like to share it with them. And people were electrified by all of this. So I was going out to Arizona. I'd seen this thing on the internet that he was doing this. So I went to I was there for the next 2 Sundays, and I went to both services, and it was wonderful. People were talking about their personal mystical experiences. The Congregationalists for a while had this quote, I think it was from Gracie Allen, George Burns and Gracie Allen, said God is, how does it go? God doesn't end with a period, it ends with a comma, or anyway, the message was God is still speaking to us. God hasn't stopped speaking to us. It didn't end with the Bible. I mean, Moses and those guys weren't the last people that God talked to. He's there all the time. He's very, very available, and that's what the Holy Spirit is all about, or whatever energy your faith describes it as. That's available to us. We can draw on that. We should draw on that, because really we're drawing on it whether we're conscious of it or not. And if we're not drawing on it, if we're rejecting it, then we're in deep trouble.
Right.
So, and I'm losing track of where I was going with this. Where am I going?
Well, I'll add something. That book that I mentioned, what they said, the reason that Christianity dropped the reincarnation model, because it was in early Hebrew texts, and then it was also in early Christianity, was because of the divine right of kings. And you couldn't have your heir take, if you were part of God, which is what all the kings claimed in feudal times, or previous to feudal times even, then your child you couldn't reincarnate as your child already. So that was why they said they took it out.
Oh, well, that's very possible too.
Yeah.
I mean, you could certainly say that it's because in reincarnation stories, people seem to recognize that there is a familial ties, and one lifetime you're the father of the child, and the next time you're the child of that child, or whatever. So it does kind of screw up the authoritarian structure. But even given that, there are huge segments of the population in the world. The Hindu belief is that there's karma, there are classes. They have the untouchables, and they can seem to maintain this notion of authoritarianism, which a lot of it's flawed. I mean, karma is very flawed, and still believe in reincarnation.
Right.
It's part of the package that you get if you're a Hindu, and it seems to work for them. On Buddhism, I mean, even more so. It's I think it's kind of a fact of life, to tell you the truth. I don't see that we can get away from that idea. Now, whether you want to reincarnate or not, once you've crossed over, you're on the other side. I think that there is a story in Plato. This is 400 BC in Plato's Republic, the 12th volume of Plato's Republic. He talks about this soldier named her, and who is killed in the battlefield. He and his comrades are brought back to be burned, their bodies to be burned on a funeral pyre. And at the last minute, he sits up and he says, "I've been sent back to tell you what happens when we die." And the story that Plato relates is, I was running across this field with my companions who'd been killed, and we came to a place of judgment. And the judges, this is the life review that you hear about in current near-death experiences. Well, the judges would say, you have, you're going to be punished or you're going to be rewarded. So for a time, they either go to be punished or they go to be rewarded. And then afterwards, they all get together in this big field again. And they say, well, what happened to you? What happened to you? It's like you've been cleansed of the karma that you had from your previous life. Then you go to a place where you choose your next life, but you only get part of the choice. Part of it is your choice to be rich, to be poor, to be healthy, to be diseased, whatever you feel that you want to experience next time around, to be a male or a female. The rest of it is the toss of the dice, pretty much. So it's half your choice and half not your choice. Half of it is fate. And I don't know what determines the fate, who determines the fate. But at that point, you drink from the river of forgetfulness, and you're back in the womb to be born again.
Wow.
So that story predates Christianity by almost half a millennium. And it's strongly in favor of reincarnation, but not so strongly in favor of karma, as far as I can tell. Right. I mean, I think we do bring things back along with us to, it's not totally a lost experience. In fact, some people, when they have had a near-death experience, or maybe even if they haven't, will have the memories from previous lifetimes. I knew a 4-year-old. Well, I know him. He's now, he's a teenager now. But he said at 4 years old, he said to his mother, who was pregnant, "Oh, I hope my sister will be born soon because I'm forgetting what God was like." And that's the sort of story that you hear much more frequently in cultures that believe in reincarnation. Right. And even though they don't encourage it, they don't want you to remember your past life so much. But it's there. It's available. And through hypnotherapy and so forth, you can be regressed into past lives. People go back and suddenly they're speaking medieval French or something like that. They will come back with all sorts of stories about who they were, what was going on, and so forth. So pretty hard to say, oh, well, it was all your imagination if you're speaking a foreign language from a different time.
Okay, so I wanted to share with everyone here, because we have some wonderful people here from all over the world, about ions and about the experience that I have, that I think you also have with this group, where everyone is coming from a different. The IONS group is the International Association for Near-Death Studies, and it meets once a year. This year we met online. Last year we met in Philadelphia, and it's usually about 500 people that all are coming from this knowing that they've either touched their source, God, universe, whatever you want to call it, or they have had a spiritually transformative experience. So they may have had near-death or spiritually transformative experience. And Lee, what I'd love to ask you is about your experience with these people, because you've had a probably longer experience with it. I found it uncanny how open-hearted and how curious and eager everyone is to share. There wasn't a lot of ego. There wasn't a lot of drama. the people were really open to sharing, and sharing is a big part of the organization. Could you speak to that with you doing the radio show for 7 years? And,
Yeah, I could talk to you about lots of different experiences that I've had and that other people have had. Um, gosh, I made a list because I thought we might want to talk about some of these things. First of all, near-death experience tends to be very personal, I think, even though there are universal aspects to it, including the going into the light. 1 in 10 or thereabouts can be distressing. They call them DNDEs, distressing near-death experiences, and those happen as well. Let me see. Let me give you some examples. Well, the one of the real easy ones is I went into this woman had coded. I went in to see her. I said, "Did you see anything when you were on the other side?" She said, "Yes, I saw my father." She said, "He died 3 years ago," but she said, I was a little girl again." She said, "And I saw my father and I was glad to see him, but behind him was this beautiful light." She said, "I just wanted to run into the light, but he said it wasn't my time yet." But she said, this is a woman in maybe her late 50s, early 60s. She said, "I just wanted to run right past him like she was 5 years old." And she tried, but he caught her and he picked her up and he said, "No, it's time for you to go back." And then she was back in her body. She was so happy to be able to tell that to somebody who knew that she was telling me the truth. That's where chaplains are so important, and so many of them are hooked into their Lutheranism or their Catholicism or whatever. They don't allow space for
right.
NDEs, and it's a big mistake. Let me give you another one. Let's see. Oh, I said they're personal, and this is a really personal one. This is one of my first interviews. Was with for the show. Was with this woman who'd been in a terrible auto accident. She'd run her little car and with her little dog had been almost totally crushed when this truck rolled over on it.
Oh my gosh.
And she said, "Suddenly I was with my grandmother, who was deceased." She said, "I was visiting her, and we walked down. Went to her apartment, and we walked down this long hallway and went out on a balcony, and we were sipping tea together, and we were talking about things, about the family and so forth." And she saw her little dog who died in the accident. She saw her little dog playing in the yard below while they were talking. And then at the last of the conversation, the dog ran off into the woods and disappeared. And she said she wanted to go after it, but she couldn't. And then she was back in her body, and they had to extricate her from this huge wreck. So that's the kind of personal aspect. Now, there's also some life determining experiences, life and death determining experiences. There was this nurse told me this story. She said there was this woman that she really loved. She was patient, but she loved her, and the woman said, "I just want to die." She told her, and she'd signed a non-resuscitation paper. But this woman, the nurse, loved her so much that when the code went off, this code sounded for this woman, she came rushing down the hall because she was going to do CPR. She said, "I was running down the hall to do what she shouldn't have done, but she really didn't want to lose this woman." She said, "And suddenly I was knocked flat on my back." She said, "Pow," just like that. And she said, "Not only that, but I could not get up. There was this heavy, heavy weight on my chest." Well, she realized it was the willpower of the spirit of this woman was saying, "No, I want to die, and I'm going to hold you here until you let me go."
Wow. That's
So
cool.
there's another story of how much strength there can be. A lot of contact. I've had contacts with people who have. I was sitting at the cafeteria at the hospital one time, just having lunch. There was no one anywhere near me. I was off in the corner somewhere, and I felt this hand on my shoulder, and I looked, and it was. I knew it was a woman named Sarah. I said, "Sarah," know, I couldn't see anyone there, but I just knew from that touch that that's who it was. That she was a woman who had cancer and was, you know, and we talked a lot. I'd known her from before too, but she later on I discovered that she and I didn't even know she was in the hospital at that point in time. But the time that she put her hand on my shoulder was the exact time she died.
Wow.
So
Wow.
there were other. I mean, there are tons of stories. I'll tell you the worst death and the best death stories. How's that?
Okay.
Okay. The worst death I attended was this guy who was dying of cancer. They'd given him all this pain killing drugs, but he was still so angry, so enraged that this was happening to him. He was maybe in his 50s or 60s. I mean, he was young to be dying. His family was distraught. Everyone was going crazy in the room. That's why they called the chaplain in. And I was trying to calm everyone down. And the moment he died, I felt him enter my body, take over my body, and it was really an ugly feeling. And it's nauseating when you feel like you've been invaded like that. It's only happened to me once, so I can't generalize, but I excused myself from the room. I went out into the hallway and I said, "You can't be in here." I knew what he was doing. I said, "You can't be in here. You've got to go on. This is not where you belong." And then that feeling left me. Okay, that was the worst death that I attended as a chaplain. The best death that I attended as a chaplain was this family that just loved. There were generations. There was the grandfather, the great-grandfather was dying. He must have been a wonderful man. I didn't know him when he was alive, but his children, their children, and some little baby, great-grandchildren were all there saying, "We love you. Don't worry about us. We'll be fine. Just you can go. We all love you, and we know you love us." And well, when he died, there's something called a shared death experience, and I think that's what happened to me, because it was like this golden light but viscous, almost like honey pouring down into the room, and I felt like I was part of that blessing, whatever it was. I didn't know whether it was being generated by this guy, but I figured it was something bigger than that, because it was amazing. It was just amazing, and so. Gosh, it was like a physical manifestation of love, is what it was. It's beautiful. It was beautiful. I'll always treasure that.
Wow.
That was my best death. Then there was the time I was standing at the nurse's station, and the nurse said, "Oh, you're the chaplain who was here about a month ago. You came down, said some prayers for," and she named the person. I said, yeah, the family, he died, and the family, before they left, they wanted a chaplain to come down and say a prayer. So I came down, and we held hands and said a prayer for the person. And then I left. Didn't hear anything more about it until this nurse said, well, she said, the strangest thing happened. You came down it was at least half an hour after the doctor had declared this person dead. And, the paperwork had all been done. The family was going to leave as soon as the chaplain came, said a prayer. I said the prayer, I left, and the guy sat up in bed and said, well, I'm ready to go home. and I never heard the story until she told me a month later. She said it was pretty startling for everyone, especially the doctor who declared him dead. He'd been dead for half an hour or more.
So he had a spontaneous healing?
Hold on.
Did he have a spontaneous healing?
Yeah, he was well. There was nothing to keep him in the hospital anymore. He got up and got dressed and went home.
Wow. That's so cool. So Lee, could you tell us again a little bit about the NDE Radio? Because we only have about 5 more minutes, and I want to make sure if people have any questions, we have a wonderful group of people here. If anybody has any questions, this is the time to ask about NDEs or about the
Sure.
coolest stuff.
If they're interested in near-death experience, I've been doing this podcast called Nde Radio, or you can also find it under IANDS, IANDS, Nde Radio, for 7 years. So I have nearly 400 shows, and they're all available. There's no charge. You just go to that site, look for the past shows button. You may have to click on a couple of things, but you'll get to it. And then there are descriptions of all of the interviews that I've done. Some of them are just, some cases I've just read the story from the files of IANDS, but most of them are near-death experiencers or people who've had some other kind of spiritually transformative experience talking about what happened to them. And then I ask a few questions, but I try to just let them talk the way, Kathy, the way you've let me just talk and talk and talk for an hour here. So yes, if they're interested at all in following up on near-death experience information, they should also go to the IANDS website, iands.org, and look for that, because there are all sorts of benefits to, including a monthly NDE that's sent out by email. And some of those are amazing stories that I've read. Because if you go back a couple weeks, there was one that I read that was truly an astounding, very moving story that they can find if they just go ahead.
Well, I'm also putting up on the screen the virtual conference .ians.org, because Lee and I, as we said, we got to be the I don't know what you call us, the moderators on Friday evening, and these recordings are still available for purchase. And the virtual conference.ians.org, if you want to buy these recordings, you will be astounded at the wonderful stories that people are telling, and the love that is contained within is really, I think, a medicine for the soul for right now, as we're going through these chaotic times. Whether you go to ians.org or the virtualconference.org or Nde Radio.org, what you'll find is a way to reconnect with really who you are as a soul level, and be in group with people that also want to live from that space. So the community is remarkable.
Yeah, it's an amazing organization. When I was getting my doctorate in NDEs, I couldn't use the stories that I'd accumulated from the hospital because it was privacy, considerations involved, and so I went to IANDS because they have they have a library full of NDE stories, and then I used that along with my research as a chaplain. But I used the cases that I cited were from IANDS,
Right.
and they were wonderful. And Diane Corcoran, who was the president of IANDS at the time, said, about publishing. Well, one of the things I've done in my life was I was the publisher of a weekly newspaper for a while. She said, so we need an editor, so we're going to put you in charge of publications.
Hey.
She didn't know me from Adam, but she just decided that was what was going to happen. And from there, doing Vital Signs, I was the editor of Vital Signs.
Oh.
And from there, I went on to start the radio show. So.
Wow. Well, we're so glad that you have this radio show, and that it's free to the public, and that this, especially at these times where there's so much concern about people dying alone, and the uncertainty of death. I think it's the biggest fear that humans can have. Learning more and more and more about this, will give so much ease to people. And if you do lose loved ones, it may give you a chance and a way to reconnect with them after they're gone. So it's powerful information. It's free. IONS was started in 1984 by Raymond Moody. So they've have so much research available of all of this information. And then if you go to Lee, you can see Lee has this compassionate, beautiful worldview that he interviews everyone from, that just uplifts and soothes people as they share their truth, which a lot of people are scared to share their truth because of the consequences. So yeah, so thank you.
Don't be scared.
Yeah.
Oh, that'll be my final words for the day. Don't be scared.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And please share this if you feel this could help other people. Again, ions.org. I'm showing the virtual conference, and also in the data on the comments I will definitely also put nderadio.org. And Lee, thank you. I hope you'll do this for another 7 years.
Yeah. This has been great, Kathy. Thanks so much for asking me.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.